So today I wanted to tier rank all of my recent reads and basically tell you if I personally think they are worth the read or not. So if you do follow me on other platforms, then you probably are already aware that anytime that I finish a book, I will right away post my review for it to my Instagram stories. And then right after I finish doing that, I will post it to my TikTok. And then right after that, I'll post it to my GOODREADS. So again, if you follow me anywhere else, you might have already seen some of my thoughts for some of the books that we're talking about in today's video. And since I worked so hard to write up all of those reviews, I don't really want to go and just verbally repeat myself in like a end of the month wrap up sort of thing where I basically just reshare with you everything that I had spent so long trying to write down in a very nice review for you guys. So instead, what I'm going to do is I will have links down in the description below for all of the books that we're talking about in today's video that I do have a full review for, and I'll have the GOODREADS link for you so that if you wanted to hear a little bit more of my thoughts or what these books are about and I didn't share enough while we're talking today, you could just go down there and check what I had to say about it at the time that I finished reading it. And instead, what we're going to do is we're going to keep this a little bit more simple, and we're going to be like, at the end of the day, are these books actually worth your time or not? In my personal opinion, obviously some people are going to enjoy these books more than others, but in my opinion, these are how much I enjoy these books, and I'm going to tell you if I think they are worth your time or not. And we're going to do that in tier ranking format because I personally find tier rankings to be a lot of fun. So I do have 5 different tierings for you guys, which is more or less like 1 to 5 stars, but we're not strictly thinking of them as 1 to 5 stars. We're thinking of them as exactly what I had written them as, which is on the bottom level, did not finish. So these are literally the books that I DNF'd because I just was not enjoying them to the point where it's like I didn't even want to get to the end. And then right above that, we have not worth the read, which is literally, I just personally think they're not worth the read. They are more or less my 2 to 3 star ratings of sorts, but I just think that they're not worth your time. Like they were not that great. I think that like it could have been a lot better if this and this was changed. And for some reason, me and this book, we just did not click. And therefore, I will personally not recommend it to you. And therefore, I'm saying they are not worth the read. And then right on top of that, I have It Was Okay, which are more or less my 3-star ratings, which it was okay. You know what? There was a lot that I would have preferred to be different. And then also, it was not that horrible. So more or less in the middle. I don't know if I would necessarily like recommend these, but you know, they just landed up very meh for me. And then right above that are definitely worth the read, which obviously I would recommend because I had a great time reading these. They weren't perfect, but they were better than It Was Okay, you know? And then on top of that is obviously my 5-star reads or like something a little bit above a 4-star where it's just like, I loved it. I had a great time with it. Definitely would recommend it. And I personally thought that they were a really, really, really fun time. And I don't know what you're waiting for. You should definitely read them if they were on your radar sort of thing. So that is my tier rankings. And with that said, let's get started. So first up, I have A Savage Lands by Stacey Marie Brown. So this is the first book in the Savage Lands series. And I actually went into great detail about this book and what I thought about it in a video that I made earlier this month, which was book series that I never really planned on finishing because I actually decided to DNF the series after book 1 because I just knew that the series was not going to work out for me. I really loved the idea of this story in general. Like you're basically following this dystopian world where fae and humans are like living together and there's a lot of like politics, kind of them like fighting for like dominance and things like that. And happens to be you're following this girl who at the beginning of the story ends up getting herself stuck in this fae prison where fae, demons, and humans are like all fighting for survival and just trying to like get by. And it was actually a very interesting setting for a story and I was really liking the idea of it. But then unfortunately the execution was not really working out for me and I had a lot of issues with the way it was being built up, the information we were getting. I really wasn't liking the main girl. I wasn't liking the way it was written in general, and therefore I just couldn't put myself through 5 more books of it, and that is why I decided to not continue on with the series. And therefore I would personally say that this series was not worth the read. So yeah. So I have absolutely no idea why I ended up putting these 2 books in this tier ranking, but I did do a reread of A Court of Wing and Ruin and then A Court of Frost and Starlight in the month of November specifically. And obviously I'm putting it on load because it was the 4th time that I reread those 2 books. I did start a reread of Avatar at the end of October. I had read A Court of Thorns and Roses and then A Court of Mist and Fury. Obviously, absolutely loved them. And then it kind of just like trickled into November. So that's probably how these like ended up in this tier ranking without me noticing. But either way, obviously I loved it. I didn't end up rereading A Court of Silver Flame specifically because that's Nesta and Cassian's story. And I did just do a reread of this series maybe like 6 months ago, and I did reread that book in that reread, but this time around I was kind of just in the mood to like revisit They Stand, so that is all that I did. So this next book, I know it's very hard to see, but it is A Devil in the Deep Blue Sea by Elizabeth O'Rourke. So this book I actually had read in a vlog that I made at the beginning of the month, which was Spend the Week with Me while I try to read less. So I did go into great detail about this book and like what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it as I was reading it. So I'll try not to repeat myself here, but in case you didn't see that video, I'll just quickly tell you that this book is basically about a girl who ends up going on vacation with her ex-boyfriend and his entire family to try and give him a second chance. And then when she's there, she ends up falling for her ex-boyfriend's brother instead. So this was a really, really fun time. I do think that I'm going to end up putting it on Loved It, even though I didn't give it a 5 stars. I believe I gave it maybe like a 4.5 stars or so, because I remember getting a little bit bored as it got later into the book, but that was only because like the technicality of how the book was actually like laid out. Like for the majority of the story, we were actually on vacation in Hawaii and they were doing all these fun adventures, and it really made for a very fast-paced, very enjoyable sort of read. Like I was just having a really freaking great time watching them do all of these like hikes and going surfing and just like jumping from hotel to hotel and like island to island. It was a really fun time. And then you got that like taboo forbiddenness thing going on, and I really, really liked it. But then at the like as we got later into the book, they obviously had to like leave vacation eventually, and then once they did leave vacation, it was kind of like the technical part of the book where it's like, are we going to be able to make this couple get together? Are we going to be able to make it work in real life of sorts? And that is kind of why I got a little bit more bored, only because like it didn't really add up to the funness of the beginning of the book. But I still think that the way that everything went down at the end of the book was a really, really great time. But my enjoyment level did naturally just go down a little bit. That's why I didn't get a 5 stars, but I still absolutely love the story and definitely think it is worth the read. This next book is Mine Would Be You by Kay Jamila, and I definitely think that this book was worth the read. I believe I gave it a 4.25 stars at the time. I did read this book in the Spend the Week With Me vlog, so I'll have that link down below in case you wanted to hear a lot more of my thoughts on this book. But more or less, this book is basically just about this girl who's going to end up falling in love with her ex-boyfriend's best friend. And the thing about it was that it was very heavy in like this girl has a lot of trust issues, and she's not necessarily 100% over her ex, but she's going to meet this new guy. He's going to be absolutely amazing, and she's going to try to give him a shot anyway, and he's going to be very patient with her because he knows that like, you know, she's having a little bit of issues with falling in love and like trusting people and getting into a new relationship and everything like that. So that's kind of like the vibe of the story, and I personally very much connected to her specifically because just the way that like she thought and the way that she processed things, the way that she reacted to things, I feel like it was very natural and realistic, and I just really liked the book because of that. So I definitely think it's worth the shot. It wasn't perfect in my eyes. I'm not putting it on Loved It, but I do think that it was worth the read. These next 2 books is The Demon King and then The Exiled Queen. So these are the first 2 books in the 7 Realms series by Cinda William Chima. So these books have been on my physical TBR for years and years, like probably at least a minimum of 2 years. They are YA fantasy though, and my YA fantasy era has somewhat passed, and therefore that is why they've been sitting there for so long. And I just knew that I was never going to get around to reading them physically, so I decided to read them via audio instead. And I think that was a good move, but then also a bad move. It was a good move because it made me actually read them, because if I didn't read them via audio, I wasn't going to read them at all. So I'm happy that I decided to do that, except it was also a little bit of a bad move because it made it very hard for me to actually like grab a hold of the story and figure out what was actually going on, because I was listening to it instead of reading it with my eyes. And the reason for that was because it was very heavy on multiple POV, in the sense of like kind of Game of Thrones, the way that Game of Thrones is set up, where you're following a lot of different characters as they are doing different things in the same kingdom, and their stories are separate but also are slowly weaving together. Like you're following a princess, and then you're following, you know, one of her guards, and you're also following some like poverty people and a lot of people in the middle. And it was a lot of people to follow and a lot of different storylines to follow, but obviously they were slowly coming together, and like all of them would obviously like meet up at a certain point. And that is kind of why I had a hard time grasping it via audio, because I wasn't able to like look at all of the names, and therefore I was mixing everybody up, and therefore the storylines were getting mixed up, and I was having a hard time, you know, figuring out what was actually going on. So for the majority of book 1, I honestly had a pretty hard time, you know, grasping a hold of the story, if that makes sense. So I am going to put book 1 as it was only okay. But that happens to be, by the time I got to book 2, I finally started figuring everybody out, and everything started to make a lot more sense to me, and I actually started really enjoying it once that started to happen. And therefore book 2 I'm putting on worth the read, because I do think it was worth the read. I had a good time with it, and I am excited to continue on with the series. So that is that. And then via audio this month, I did also read the X Hex, and I'm going to put this on It Was Just Okay, because honestly, I expected it to be a lot worse than it ended up being based off of the reviews that I've seen by it. Like, I've seen a lot of people be extremely disappointed by this book, so I guess I kind of went into it with very low expectations, and then I honestly kind of enjoyed it for what it was, but definitely do not think it was that great of a book. So that's why I'm kind of leaving it on like very in the middle, because it was very meh. And I do think that I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much if I wasted the time reading with my eyes. But via audio, it was not a horrible waste of my time. And I do think that it was very like a Sabrina the Teenage Witch sort of episode. Like, that's kind of the vibes that I got off of it. And I am a fan of Sabrina the Teenage Witch, so I kind of did enjoy it for that sort of vibe. But I do understand why people like did not enjoy it as much as me. So, you know, I'm putting it over there. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but wouldn't necessarily say that it's not worth your time if you were very interested in reading it. This next book is Play With Me by Becca Max. So this is the second book in the Playing for Keeps companion series. The first book was Consider Me, and I absolutely loved book one. And then unfortunately, book two, it did end up letting me down a little bit. I still enjoyed it for what it was, but it wasn't anything too special for me. So it was a brother's best friend forbidden romance with a hockey setting. Like the main guy is a professional hockey player, and then this girl is his captain slash best friend's younger sister, and she is completely off limits. And they're gonna end up having a friends with benefits sort of relationship, and that obviously is going to turn into them falling for each other. And I think that it was fine, but I honestly wasn't impressed, and I was a little bit let down because I really did enjoy Consider Me like a freaking ton, and then this one just was not as good in comparison. I still do think that it was worth the read, even though I'm very close to putting it on it was just okay, because honestly, like, it was just okay for me, but I do think that it was worth the read. I do think that I gave it like maybe a 3.75 out of 5 stars at the time that I read it, and I feel like that was a pretty fair rating. So I will say that if you liked Consider Me and you wanted to read about this couple's story because you got to see a little bit of them in book one, I say it's worth your time. But if you didn't read Consider Me, I would not start with reading this book. I would read Consider Me first, fall in love with the world and the universe and all of the hockey players in general, and then if you really like the writing style and the author and everything like that, then you can continue on with this book. Does that make sense? So this next book is Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade, and this is kind of a funny story because I had physically owned this book since about the time that it had come out, so a very long time ago, probably like 2 years, a year and a half, who the hell knows. But either way, I had seen it in a store, I thought it looked pretty cute, decided to bring it home, add it to my shelf, and then never got around to reading it because I had seen like too many mixed reviews. I didn't even know what the book was about at the time that I picked it up, and then once I kind of like started hearing a lot more about it, I'm like, I don't know if this book is actually for me. So it kind of sat there for years, and then I'm almost positive that I actually unhauled this book recently, except at the time that I decided to listen to the audiobook version of it, I wasn't aware that I unhauled it. Like, I forgot the fact that I unhauled it, and I'm like, you know what, why do I listen to the audio to actually be able to check it off of my physical TBR? Because some books that I just know that I don't really want to physically read, I'll read it via audio just so that I can like actually say that I've read them. So that was what I was doing when I decided to pick this book up. And then after the fact, I kind of remembered that I unhauled it, but it doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, I did get through this entire book, listen to it via audio, and I am happy that I decided to do that because I do think that if I would have read it physically, I would have hated it a lot more. Still hated the book, but would have hated it more if I read it with my eyes. So the thing is that this book is kind of one of those, like, we met online and then we met in person, and she doesn't realize who he is, but he eventually realizes who she is, and he decides to keep the fact that he knows that she is this person from their online chats a secret, and then obviously is all gonna blow up in their face by the end of it. So I wasn't really a fan of that type of storyline, and that's what was holding me off from reading this book for a very long time. But via audio, it honestly did not irk me as much as it would have if I read it with my eyes. So I am happy I gave it a shot this way, but I still was not a fan of the book, and therefore I'm going to put it on not worth the read. Like, not only was like the storyline a storyline that I'm not really a fan of, but I really didn't like the guy. I thought that like left and right, he could have just made different moves. Wasn't a fan of him in general, wasn't really connecting to either one of the characters, and there was just a lot about it that didn't really work for me. So that is why I ended up giving it like a 2 stars in general, saying it's not worth the read, but I still am happy that I gave it a shot via audio. So if it was something that was very like high up on your list and you really wanted to read it and you were considering reading it via audio, I would say that the audiobook was good, but the storyline in itself was not really for me. This next book is Quarterback Sneak by Candy Steiner. So this is the 3rd book in her college football romance companion series, and I personally think that this series is just getting better and better as the books go on. Like, the first book was Fair Catch, I wasn't a huge fan of it, but then the second book I ended up really enjoying. It was a fake dating romance. I loved everything about it besides for like the 3rd act conflict, so it didn't end up getting a 5 stars, but still was a really, really amazing read. And then this one ended up absolutely blowing me away. I'm pretty sure it was like my favorite read of the month, like by far. I'm gonna obviously put it on Loved It because it got an easy 5 out of 5 stars. And the thing was is that it had a very basic storyline in the sense of like, it was kind of just like a forbidden romance between a football player and then the coach's daughter, and those kind of stories usually generally play out in the same exact way. But the way that this story was actually built up, the way that the characters had like the specific personalities that they did and the things that they were going through, and then the way that the relationship was actually like, you know, playing out in the story is what I actually felt to be extremely unique for this book, and it really stood out to me as something very different. So even though it had a very classic storyline, I still felt it to be very, very unique, and I absolutely loved every single second of it. And without a doubt, I recommend giving that book a shot if you are into college sports romances. This next book is Torn by Carrie Ann Cole, which I actually had on my radar for a very long time, and I never really picked it up because I had a weird feeling that I wasn't going to like it because of the actual storyline of the book. But for some reason, I'm like, you know what? I really kind of want to give it a shot. So that is exactly what I did. So if you're not familiar with the story, it is basically about this girl who is 17 years old, and throughout the book, she is going to turn 18, and she's going to end up having a taboo, forbidden age gap romance with her 32-year-old pseudo uncle. So this guy is basically like best friends with her father, has been with her since the day that she was born, and more or less helped raise her. And as she gets older, she starts to develop like romantic feelings for him, and obviously it's going to end up being their romance. So that was a little bit out there for me. Like, I am down for like age gap romances, I'm down for taboo romances, I'm down for forbidden romances, but just because of the scenario of like how she actually grew up with him being so close to her, kind of acting like a godfather of sorts, like I thought it was a little bit weird, and therefore I was very hesitant to enjoy this book. But somehow the author actually made me really, really like it. She kind of went through like all of the uncomfortable feelings that I was having, all of these suspicious feelings, and had the characters really talk about it in like very big detail of like, how is this going to work? We know that this is weird, but we just can't help our feelings. And the way that the book actually just like ended up playing itself out really ended up working out for me. And I found it to be like, even though it was very, very, very weird, I still somehow really enjoyed it. So I'm going to put it on worth the read, because I don't think the book was perfect, but I honestly had a really great time with it. And especially if you are a fan of like age gap, taboo, forbidden romances, and you were iffy about this book because of like, you know, the actual scenario of how they know each other, I still would say to give it a shot, because I think that somehow this author just really made it work. Next up, I have Always Only You by Chloe Liesa. So this is the second book in the Bergman Brothers companion series. And I remember really enjoying the first book in this series. I read it a couple of months ago, maybe like, I don't know, April time or sorts. And I remember being a solid time. Unfortunately though, this one did not work out for me. And I did DNF at 60%. And I just was not vibing with anything about the story. I wasn't liking the writing for some reason. I wasn't liking either of the characters. I wasn't liking where it was going. I just wasn't feeling it for a lot of reasons. I wrote a whole review for it, so I won't go over it again. But basically, I did DNF this book either like 60 or 61% in. So no, I do not recommend reading it. And if you really want to know why, then check out my Goodreads review that I have linked down in the description below. But anyway, after that, I did also end up reading Tapping the Billionaire by Max Monroe. And I did DNF this book as well, 61% in. So I didn't really like this book because it was a little bit too heavy on the sex, not heavy on the plot. Like, it was just a little bit too much for me. Like, I really liked how it started out. It was kind of like, what was it? It was a workplace environment sort of thing, but it also had one of those scenarios where it's like they were talking online and they were also like meeting in person. They didn't realize who each other were, and it was kind of going in like that sort of sense, and I was liking where it was going. But then the second that the sex started coming into the book is kind of when it went downhill for me, and that is why I ended up giving up 61% in. So that is that. Next up, I did read A Risk on Forever by N.S. Perkins. So this is basically about a girl who ends up getting a new job as a caretaker for this woman who is dying of ALS. And at the same time, she's going to end up having a relationship with the son of this woman who is dying of ALS. So I had originally heard that this book was like very heavy hitting, very emotional and things like that. And unfortunately, I just didn't really connect to it to the point where it ended up being a very good book for me. So I am going to put it in the it was okay category, because I think that there was some good moments in this book, but overall, I didn't really love it. I don't remember what I ended up rating it, but I do have an entire review about it, like in the description below, my Goodreads review sort of thing, where I did go into a lot of detail about like what didn't really work for me. So if you were interested in hearing more of my thoughts, then you could just go check it out there. But basically, I'm just putting it in the very meh category. It's like there was some good stuff, but it wasn't amazing, and I don't know if I would necessarily recommend it. And then I did also do rereads of The Deal and then The Chase, which is the first book in the Off-Campus series, and then the first book in the Briar U series, which is like, you know, a spinoff from the Off-Campus series, because I did have audiobooks of these. I had said it in like a recent book haul of mine, how I had gotten both of these books via audio when there was a sale going on of sorts. So this month I decided to do a reread of both of them via audio, and obviously I very much did love them. I do like The Deal more than The Chase, but I really enjoyed both of them for what they were. And then anyway, lastly, I have this book called Make Me Yours by Harlow Ray. So I had seen such good things about this book, and unfortunately, I was extremely disappointed by it. I did end up DNFing it 50 pages in, mostly because I really did not like the writing style. It was very too descriptive for me, very wordy. It kind of felt like this author was literally like sitting next to a thesaurus as she was, you know, trying to write this book, and it just wasn't working for me. I knew I wasn't gonna be able to make it through the whole thing. Even if the story in itself was possibly good, I just couldn't get my head wrapped around the way that she was just like writing it and like building it up and everything like that. So I did give up on it very, very early, and I was very sad about that because I had seen so many people say such good things about it. But either way, that is all of the books that I more or less read in the month of November, even though November isn't over, but it is okay. So anyway, that is the way that I tier ranked it. I honestly had a very good month of reading. I feel like overall, I had a lot of books on the higher end of this tier rank than the lower end. So I am very happy with my reading month. Not every book is going to be able to be 5 stars, and I feel like I had a lot of really good books that were worth the the read this month and above. So with that said, I'm gonna let you guys go. So I am curious to know if you did enjoy watching me tier rank my recent reads specifically. I know that for the past couple of months, I have been playing around with a little bit how I am sharing with you my recent reads. Like sometimes I'm just sit here and like repeat everything that I had talked about in my reviews when I had written them and post them to Instagram, Goodreads, and TikTok. And sometimes I was kind of doing it more of like the, are they worth the read or not? And then this time I did it, are they worth the read tier ranking format? So I'd love to hear your thoughts, if you have any, on which type of format you really enjoy the most when it comes to sharing with you all of the books that I've recently read. But either way, with that said, if you did just generally enjoy this video, I'd love for you to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed to my channel, please hit that subscribe button because I would really appreciate it. But either way, thank you so much for just taking the time to, watch my video, because I really appreciate that in itself. So either way, with that said, until next time, enjoy reading.